Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in the middle of the Arabian desert. The sun is beating down mercilessly, the temperature hovering around 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Sand stretches endlessly in every direction, creating waves of heat that distort the horizon. You're alone, surrounded by nothing but silence and emptiness. Now, imagine someone telling you that right here, in this brutal, lifeless landscape, the most ambitious city in human history will rise, a vertical metropolis stretching 170 kilometers long, housing 9 million people, powered entirely by renewable energy, with no cars, no roads, and no carbon emissions. You'd think they were insane, wouldn't you? But this isn't a fever dream or science fiction. This is NEOM, specifically The Line, and Saudi Arabia has already spent over $100 billion making it real. Or at least trying to make it real. Because here's what they're not telling you. The project is collapsing in real time. Construction has essentially frozen, and the fantasy city that was supposed to revolutionize urban living might become the most expensive failure in modern history. The question isn't whether this city will change the world anymore. The question is, how did we get here, and what happens when $500 billion disappears into the sand? The moment everything changed. Let me take you back to January 10th, 2021. That's the exact date when Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stood before cameras and unveiled something that seemed impossible. He wasn't announcing another skyscraper or luxury resort. He was presenting The Line, a city built as two parallel mirrored structures, each 500 meters tall, and stretching in a perfectly straight line across 170 kilometers of desert. No intersections, no traffic lights, no pollution. Every resident would have access to all daily needs within a 5-minute walk. High-speed rail would connect the entire city, allowing end-to-end travel in just 20 minutes. The structures would be surrounded by nature preserves, powered by wind and solar, with vertical farming providing food security. It sounded like something from a utopian novel. The promotional videos showed gleaming towers rising from pristine desert, lush gardens cascading down mirrored walls, residents living in harmony with technology and nature. The world watched, mesmerized and skeptical in equal measure. But MBS, as he's known, wasn't presenting a dream. He was presenting a necessity. Like Saudi Arabia's economy has been built on oil for nearly a century, and everyone knows oil won't last forever. The kingdom produces roughly 10 million barrels per day, generating hundreds of billions in revenue. But global energy transitions threaten that dominance. Vision 2030, the Crown Prince's ambitious reform program, aims to diversify the economy away from oil dependency. Tourism, technology, entertainment, renewable energy, these are the pillars of Saudi Arabia's future, according to the plan. And NEOM, particularly The Line, represents the boldest bet in that entire strategy. The message was clear. Saudi Arabia won't just adapt to the future, it will build the future from scratch. The staggering scale of ambition. To understand why The Line captivated global attention, you need to grasp the sheer insanity of its proposed scale. This wasn't a neighborhood or even a normal city. The structure would contain 34 square kilometers of floor space, roughly the size of 6,000 football fields, stacked vertically. 9 million residents would live inside, making it larger than New York City's population. The mirrored exterior walls would reflect the desert, creating an optical illusion where the structure seems to vanish into the landscape. Inside, residential areas, commercial zones, parks, and entertainment venues would be layered vertically, connected by high-speed elevators and autonomous vehicles moving in hidden tunnels. No resident would ever need to travel more than 5 minutes on foot for groceries, schools, healthcare, or recreation. The entire structure would produce zero carbon emissions, powered by renewable energy generated on-site and in surrounding areas. The technical challenges were staggering. Engineers would need to construct foundations deep enough to support structures twice the height of most skyscrapers, in desert terrain known for shifting sands and extreme temperatures. The mirrored facade would require materials capable of withstanding sandstorms that could sandblast ordinary glass into opacity within months. Climate control systems would need to keep the interior comfortable, while external temperatures exceeded 120 degrees in summer. Water would need to be desalinated from the Red Sea, then pumped upward against gravity to supply millions of residents. Food production would require massive vertical farms using hydroponics and artificial lighting. Transportation systems would need to move potentially hundreds of thousands of people daily through a structure stretching longer than the distance from Philadelphia to New York City. But here's what made people truly uncomfortable: the human cost of building in that location. The line was planned to cut directly through traditional lands of the Howeitat tribe, communities that have lived in that region for generations. In 2020, reports emerged of forced evictions, with residents given minimal compensation and little warning. Abdul Rahim al-Howeitat, a Howeitat tribe member who publicly opposed the evictions, was killed by Saudi security forces in April 2020 after posting videos protesting the land seizures. 3 other men from the tribe, Ibrahim al-Howeitat, Atala al-Howeitat, Gaikan Shadli al-Howeitat, were sentenced to death in 2023 for resisting eviction orders. International human rights organizations condemned the actions, but construction continued regardless. The foundation of this futuristic utopia was being built on displacement and bloodshed. The economic illusion. Now let's talk about money, because this is where the fantasy truly collides with reality. The original budget for NEOM as a whole was estimated at $500 billion, with the line representing a significant portion of that investment. To put that in perspective, $500 billion is roughly equivalent to the entire GDP of countries like Belgium or Thailand. It's more than the market value of companies like Tesla or Visa. It represents approximately 15 years of Saudi Arabia's current non-oil revenue. The funding would come primarily from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, sovereign wealth reserves built from decades of oil profits, alongside hoped-for contributions from international investors. The plan assumed massive foreign investment would flood in once construction demonstrated viability. But here's the problem: the math never actually worked. Independent economists and urban planning experts began running the numbers, and the projections fell apart under scrutiny. Construction costs for standard skyscrapers typically range from $400 to $600 per square foot in developed nations. The line's specialized design, extreme location, and technical requirements would push costs far higher, potentially $1,500 to $2,000 per square foot or more. With 34 square kilometers of floor space, that translates to approximately 366 million square feet. At $1,500 per square foot, construction costs alone would exceed $550 billion, not including infrastructure for power, water, transportation, or the surrounding NEOM region. The original budget didn't just underestimate costs, it ignored financial reality entirely. Moreover, the economic model assumed the line would attract 9 million residents willing to pay premium prices for housing in an experimental city in the middle of nowhere. For context, Dubai, with decades of development, world-class airports, established business districts, and actual beaches, has a population of roughly 3.5 million. Singapore, one of the world's most successful planned cities, has 5.7 million residents after 60 years of development. The line expected to exceed both within 15 years of completion, despite having none of their advantages. Who exactly would these 9 million residents be? Where would they work? What economic opportunities would justify moving to a structure in the desert with no existing business ecosystem, no established cultural institutions, no organic urban development? The promotional materials never answered these questions because there were no good answers. The unraveling reality, fast forward to 2024 and early 2025, and the cracks in the facade have become canyons. In October 2024, Bloomberg reported that NEOM's leadership had significantly scaled back completion targets. The original plan called for 1.5 million residents by 2030. The revised internal target? Just 300,000 residents, an 80% reduction. The full 170-kilometer length has been quietly abandoned. Current plans focus on a 2.4-kilometer initial section, less than 2% of the original vision. Construction sites that were supposed to bustle with activity have slowed dramatically. Contractors report payment delays, supply chain disruptions, and constant design changes that make efficient construction impossible. Workers who traveled to Saudi Arabia, expecting steady employment, describe chaotic conditions, unclear objectives, and projects that start and stop without explanation. International investors, initially intrigued by the boldness of the vision, have largely stayed away. Despite extensive marketing campaigns and high-profile presentations at global economic forums, NEOM has failed to attract the massive foreign investment the project requires. Investors aren't stupid. They can see the same problematic economics that independent analysts identified. Without proven demand, without demonstrated viability, without any comparable successful model, putting billions into an experimental desert megacity represents unacceptable risk. The few international companies that did sign partnership agreements have mostly committed to pilot projects or consulting relationships, not the type of massive investment NEOM needs to survive. The technical challenges have proven even worse than critics predicted. Desert construction in extreme heat creates worker safety issues that slow progress significantly. Materials that work perfectly in controlled environments fail under the specific combination of heat, sand, and sun exposure found in northwestern Saudi Arabia. The mirrored facade, central to the line's visual identity, has encountered repeated problems. Test installations showed that desert sandstorms could damage or obscure the mirrors faster than maintenance crews could clean them. Water infrastructure requires desalination plants that haven't been built yet, powered by renewable energy facilities that are still in planning stages. The high-speed rail system needs tunneling and track laying across terrain that shifts with temperature changes. Every system depends on other systems that don't exist yet, creating cascading delays that push timelines further into impossible territory. Why this matters beyond Saudi Arabia. You might be wondering why you should care about a construction project in the Saudi desert. Let me tell you exactly why this matters to you, wherever you are. First, this represents the largest bet on urban planning in modern history, and its failure will ripple through how we think about city design for decades. Urban planners worldwide have watched NEOM closely, seeing whether audacious vision and unlimited funding could overcome traditional constraints. The answer appears to be no. You cannot skip the organic development, trial and error, and gradual evolution that create successful cities. You cannot design utopia from scratch and expect humans to simply fill in the spaces you've created. This lesson will influence how governments and developers approach future urban projects, likely making them more conservative and incremental. Second, NEOM's collapse demonstrates the limits of authoritarian development models. China's rapid urban development has inspired admiration and imitation worldwide, with many leaders envious of the ability to simply decree that cities should exist and then build them quickly without democratic deliberation. NEOM was supposed to be the Gulf version of that model. Visionary leadership, unlimited resources, no pesky democratic obstacles. Its failure shows that speed and authority cannot replace sound economics, genuine demand, and practical planning. Citizens aren't interchangeable widgets you can slot into whatever urban form you've designed. They're complex beings with preferences, needs, and expectations shaped by culture and experience. Ignoring those realities doesn't make them disappear. Third, the financial implications extend far beyond Saudi Arabia's borders. The kingdom's public investment fund, which bankrolls NEOM, also invests heavily in international markets. It owns significant stakes in companies like Uber, SoftBank's Vision Fund, and Newcastle United Football Club. It has partnerships with American private equity firms and European technology companies. If NEOM drains the fund's resources without generating returns, that affects global investment flows. Moreover, Saudi Arabia's economic stability matters for oil markets, regional security, and international trade. A failed megaproject that weakens the kingdom's finances creates ripples through interconnected global systems. The human cost hidden in the sand. Let's return to those forced evictions, because this aspect has been largely buried under the spectacle of futuristic renderings and ambitious promises. The Howeitat tribe has inhabited northwestern Saudi Arabia for centuries, with traditional lands directly in the line's planned path. These aren't abstract statistics. These are real families with homes, farms, graveyards where their ancestors are buried, and cultural connections to specific landscapes. When Saudi authorities announced NEOM's development, Residents received eviction notices with minimal compensation based on property valuations that didn't reflect replacement costs or account for non-financial losses. Protests were met with arrests. Vocal opponents faced violence. Abdul Rahim al-Howeitat's death became internationally known because he documented his opposition on social media before being killed. But how many others were silenced without cameras recording their resistance? How many families were displaced without international attention? Saudi Arabia's tightly controlled media environment makes comprehensive documentation nearly impossible. What we know represents the visible portion of a much larger story. The three men sentenced to death, Ibrahim, Attallah, and Shadli al-Howeitat, were convicted of terrorism-related charges that human rights groups describe as fabricated justifications for punishing dissent. International pressure has so far failed to overturn their sentences. This human cost reveals the moral emptiness at NEOM's core. The project is marketed as progress, innovation, and humanity's future. But it's being built on the erasure of existing communities, the suppression of indigenous voices, and the prioritization of a billionaire's vision over the lives of ordinary people. There's a bitter irony in Saudi Arabia presenting the line as a model for sustainable, harmonious urban living, while simultaneously destroying the sustainable, harmonious existence of people who've lived in balance with that landscape for generations. Progress that requires such destruction isn't progress. It's just another form of colonization, with the state colonizing its own citizens in service of modernization. What happens next? So where does this leave us? As of early 2025, NEOM officially continues, but the reality on the ground tells a different story. The scaled-back targets represent an acknowledgement of failure, disguised as pragmatic adjustment. Officials now speak of a phased approach and realistic timelines, corporate language for the original plan was fantasy and we're scrambling to salvage something. The 2.4-kilometre demonstration section might actually get completed, creating a bizarre monument to abandoned ambition, a tiny fragment of a grand vision that couldn't survive contact with reality. It will likely house some government workers, NEOM employees, and people attracted by subsidized housing, but nothing resembling the organic, thriving urban ecosystem originally promised. International attention will gradually fade as the project clearly fails to deliver on its promises. Media outlets will move on to other stories, and NEOM will join the long list of megaprojects that consumed vast resources while delivering minimal results. Within Saudi Arabia, it may become a cautionary tale or a source of embarrassment, or it might be reframed through official narrative as a partial success that achieved modified objectives. The government's tight control over domestic media makes the latter more likely. Expect documentaries about NEOM's achievements that ignore the gap between vision and reality. For Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the stakes are more personal. He has tied his reputation and credibility to Vision 2030, with NEOM as its flagship project. Its failure weakens his position and raises questions about his judgment among the royal family and power brokers who keep him in authority. However, Saudi Arabia's political system provides few mechanisms for accountability, especially at the highest levels. He's unlikely to face consequences in any conventional sense. The costs will be borne by the Saudi people through reduced government services, delayed reforms in other areas, and the opportunity cost of resources that could have been invested more productively. The workers who travel to Saudi Arabia expecting employment will disperse, seeking opportunities elsewhere or returning home with stories about the chaos and disappointment. The Howeitat families displaced from their lands will never get them back. Even if NEOM is abandoned, they won't be compensated or allowed to return. Their loss is permanent. The landscape will bear scars from construction, foundations dug, roads built, infrastructure partially completed then abandoned. The desert will slowly reclaim what humans briefly disturbed, but the process takes decades. The broader pattern of vanity projects. NEOM isn't unique in the annals of failed megaprojects. It's just the most expensive and ambitious recent example. History is littered with leaders who believed they could overcome economic reality through willpower and resources. Consider Brasilia, Brazil's purpose-built capital inaugurated in 1960. While it technically succeeded as a functioning city, it has long been criticized for its sterile, car-dependent design that prioritizes aesthetics over livability. Or look at Naypyidaw in Myanmar, a capital city built from scratch that remains largely empty because people simply prefer to stay in Yangon, where actual economic and cultural life exists. China has multiple ghost cities, enormous urban developments built speculatively that never attracted the anticipated residents, leaving vast apartment complexes sitting empty while deteriorating. What these projects share is a fundamental misunderstanding of how cities work. Successful cities emerge from economic necessity, geographic advantage, or both. People concentrate in specific locations because those locations offer opportunities, access to trade routes, natural resources, employment, education, culture, or community. You cannot simply build infrastructure and expect opportunity to materialize around it. The "if you build it, they will come" philosophy works in movies, not in urban planning. Cities are living, evolving organisms shaped by millions of individual decisions made by residents responding to their circumstances. They cannot be imposed from above by decree. The tragedy is that Saudi Arabia's $500 billion could have been transformatively invested in ways that actually benefited the kingdom and its people. Imagine that sum devoted to education, building world-class universities, funding scholarships, training the next generation in skills relevant to a post-oil economy, or invested in healthcare infrastructure, ensuring every Saudi citizen had access to excellent medical care, or used to diversify the economy through thousands of small and medium enterprises, creating actual jobs and opportunity rather than a fantasy city, or devoted to renewable energy installations that could have made Saudi Arabia a legitimate leader in solar and wind power generation. The opportunity cost of NEOM is measured not just in dollars wasted, but in all the good that money could have accomplished if directed toward achievable goals. Your role in this story, here's where you come in. This isn't just a story about Saudi Arabia, it's about the narratives we're all sold about progress, innovation, and the future. We live in an era of constant megaproject announcements. Billionaires promise Mars colonies, underground tunnel networks, floating cities, and artificial intelligence that will solve all our problems. Governments propose infrastructure programs that will revolutionize society. Tech companies unveil products that will change everything, and media coverage amplifies these announcements uncritically, treating aspirational visions as imminent reality. You have the power to demand better. When you see outrageous claims about future megaprojects, ask questions. Who benefits from this project? What's the actual evidence that it's viable? What's the opportunity cost? Who gets hurt in the process? Has anything like this succeeded before? And if not, why will this time be different? What do independent experts say when they're not being paid by project promoters? Critical thinking isn't cynicism, it's responsible citizenship. Furthermore, recognize that the most important progress usually isn't glamorous. Incremental improvements to existing cities, better public transportation, more housing, improved schools, cleaner energy grids, don't generate viral promotional videos or breathless media coverage. They're boring, but they actually work, and they improve millions of lives in measurable ways. Support leaders and policies that prioritize practical progress over grand gestures. Vote with your attention and your wallet for substance over spectacle. Finally, remember the Howeitat families when you hear stories about progress and development. Progress that requires the erasure of existing communities isn't progress worth having. Sustainable development must be built on consent, equity, and genuine improvement in human welfare, not just the fulfillment of powerful people's visions. Hold decision-makers accountable for the human cost of their ambitions. The conclusion we should have seen coming. Let's return to where we started, standing in that desert, imagining a vertical city rising from the sand. The vision was audacious, even beautiful in its way. A world without cars, without pollution, where nature and technology existed in perfect balance, where you could walk to everything you needed, where energy came from the sun and wind, where 9 million people lived in harmony within a structure that seemed to defy physics and convention. But here's what that vision missed. Cities aren't built, they're grown. They emerge from human needs, desires, failures, and successes layered over generations. They're messy, inefficient, and frustrating because humans are messy, inefficient, and frustrating. The most successful cities in history weren't designed by visionaries. They evolved through countless small decisions made by ordinary people pursuing their own interests. The grand plan, the perfect design, the utopian vision. These have consistently failed throughout history because they forget that cities exist for people, not the other way around. Saudi Arabia's $500 billion desert Mirage is collapsing not because the engineering was impossible, though it probably was, not because the funding was insufficient, though it probably would have been. It's collapsing because the entire premise was wrong. You cannot skip the organic process of urban development. You cannot force 9 million people to inhabit a structure just because you've built it. You cannot create meaningful community through architectural decree. The line will likely fade from headlines, becoming another curiosity in the long history of ambitious failures. Somewhere in northwestern Saudi Arabia, partial foundations will sit in the desert, slowly buried by shifting sands. And perhaps that's the most fitting memorial to a project that confused boldness with wisdom, spending with investment, and vision with viability. The desert has outlasted countless human ambitions before. It will outlast this one too. The real question now is whether we'll learn the lesson NEOM teaches, or whether the next billionaire with the next impossible vision will capture our imagination all over again, and we'll repeat this expensive, destructive cycle once more. The choice, as always, is ours.